Hey guys, Youngblood with you, and I wanted to talk about the versus scenario that I proposed last time, which was the Gladius versus the Hornet. Now, there's a lot of good feedback in the comments, so I wanted to go ahead and thank everybody who took the time to contribute and get your opinions across. So, with that in mind, this was a really interesting simulated fight in my mind, mainly because they're two combat-focused ships who go about their business in a very different way. I think the other thing that made this kind of a struggle was that I'm not really sure how fast the Gladius is going to be, and that could really be the difference maker. When we talk about two TR2 engines, it seems like it could be a pretty quick little fighter, especially seeing how its description says that it's supposed to be fast. We also know that the M50 runs two TR2 engines and tops out at about 280 meters per second. However, it also is about 4,000 kilograms lighter than the Gladius. The Gladius is also about 6,000 kilograms lighter than the stock Hornet, and the Hornet brings a 1 TR4 engine to the fight. So I think we kind of have to wonder and speculate a little bit about how two smaller engines compare to one big one. But I think knowing the weight differential between the two and the descriptions of the ships, we can safely assume that the Gladius is going to be faster than the Hornet. Now, the Gladius has a HE 5.2 engines, where the Hornet has HM 4.3. So if those numbers that follow the letters signify maybe power output or thrust factors of some sort, then that may end up giving the Gladius some additional extra speed that we're not really accounting for. With the extra weight over the M50 and kind of using that as our benchmark, I'm going to guess that the Gladius comes in at around the 240 meters per second mark, but that's just pure speculation on my part. And CIG's actually put in ships at slower speeds than I've really expected them to be, so we'll just have to kind of see what ends up happening. But I'm hoping for about 240 on the Gladius. Now, maneuverability is the other thing that the Gladius is supposed to have going for it, at least according to the description. And one thing that's interesting to me is the fact that it only has TR1 maneuvering thrusters compared to the TR2 thrusters on the Hornet. And both have 8 thrusters in total. Now, things like mass and the placement of thrusters should have a lot to do with maneuverability, but can the smaller thrusters on a lighter ship really make up the difference between the bigger thrusters on a bigger ship? I think to fit the description, which is kind of what it seems like CIG tends to follow, it has to be pretty agile, but I'm not really sure I can say with confidence it's going to completely outmaneuver the Hornet either. Now, I think there really is a lot working against the Gladius, at least when we're looking at the stats. And those could be updated 100 times from Sunday, and they probably will be. But with its smaller max power plant, smaller max shields, and less weaponry, not to mention smaller weaponry, it's going to have a hard time with sustainability, especially since several of these kind of work in concert together. For example, having max size 1 size on your 3 guns and trying to get through the size 4 shield on a Hornet is going to be a real chore. And when your opponent in the Hornet can bring up to 6 guns with no problems and is working on your size 2 shields, living to fight another day is not going to be an easy task. But let's go ahead and assume that the Gladius is as nimble and fast as it should be. There's still a factor that doesn't help it out, and that's because the Hornet is bringing all gimbaled weapons. It's got gimbaled weapons on the wings. It's got gimbaled weapons on the canard turret. It's got a ball turret if you're kitting yours up that way. And that's how I chose to kit mine out. Now, with the Gladius, we don't have a lot of flexibility until we actually get it into the game or it gets size 2 options, but for now, there's not much you can do with it. The Hornet, you get that level of customization, and it's just a lot of weapons that gimbal. And having weapons that can help to kind of negate some of your lack of comparative maneuverability could actually be a difference maker that some may not be considering when we look at this fight. Now, I think to ships I've flown in battles and ones that I've been in and ones that I've fought against, specifically flying in the Hornet versus things like the M50, the M50s are fast, and they can be hard to land shots, but I feel like I can always maneuver myself where I'm not putting myself at great risk, and I can keep them in my sights, or at least close to sights very often. So, to this point, this has been pretty pro-Hornet, and that's for good reason. I think, the biggest difference maker for the Gladius comes with its missiles. And it's funny because in the previous one I talked about missiles maybe not being a huge deal breaker, but I think in this situation we have to look at the missiles in a little bit more detail. Basically, I think about the Gladius, flying fast at the target, working down the shields, and then right before peeling off, letting a couple of those size 3 missiles fly. And if you're not giving the Hornet much time to react and you're using them well, you may actually end up landing those shots. And the ability of the Gladius to carry those big size 3s could be the difference maker in this fight. The Lone Reader did a really good job of breaking down this fight, and I really liked his take on the missiles overall. Something else that might be interesting is the dumbfire capabilities of the Gladius. And if it can sneak off, a couple of rockets that the Hornet can't chaff away, the Gladius may end up winning this fight. It's all dependent on the Gladius being able to work through the Hornet shields and then being able to close the distance. If it's stuck in some close-range brawl, I think this Gladius is going to lose. But if the Gladius pilot can keep its distance, land shots, and then use its agility to avoid the Hornet's superior firepower, it's got a shot if it can close the distance and use those missiles well. That being said, once those missiles are gone, I think the fight is over completely in favor of the Hornet. Honestly, I know I gave you details on the map, flying around on Dying Star, and there's a lot of obstacles and debris floating around, which should help the Gladius. But if we're talking about a fight to the death, the Hornet can kind of take his time and keep himself in a good position. Yes, the Gladius could fly through the asteroids and hope the Hornet's going to crash or lose line of sight. But at the same time, the Hornet could just hug the asteroids and force the Gladius to come to him. And then at that point, he can dictate that close-range brawl that favors the Hornet. I think the asteroid field could dictate a draw based on neither side wanting to get out of their, kind of dictated comfort zone. But if one has to die, I just don't feel that the Gladius has the stats, as it stands right now, to stick it out. So in my mind, the Hornet would be the winner of this fight, probably about 80% of the time. Now, I don't really know why I chose 80%. It just feels about right to me, and I think there's just too much firepower and strength in the Hornet to not be able to hold up against the Gladius. With that in mind, something tells me that we're going to see improvements to the Gladius's weaponry. I can't really imagine a former military fighter is going to bring less weaponry to a fight than something like a 325 or a Delta. Yes, they're a little bit different. It's not an apples-to-apples comparison, but the 325 is interesting to compare to, especially seeing as it's a nimble and fast fighter, but it's also a civilian ship. So I think we'll see some guns on the Gladius get bumped to size 2s, but we're just going to have to wait and see. Like before, this is just kind of a static scenario, so don't go running off and selling your Gladius because of this. I actually wanted to pick the Gladius because I love it. It's my favorite ship. I love looking at it. I want to get in and fly it. But I had to try and be as objective as possible. So, with that in mind, though, I think the Gladius is part of a fleet, or when the player skill isn't equal, is a ship to be reckoned with. And I can't wait to get in it and do some testing when it's finally ready. So, that's my conclusion. If you guys disagree, put it in the comments and tell me why. If you have suggestions for another upcoming versus scenario, let me know. Otherwise, stay tuned. I'll be proposing one to you later on. And have yourselves a wonderful day and take care.